The shears were cold. That was the first thing Margaret noticed. Not the sound, though the sound was its own particular thing, the slow, deliberate sound of something being separated from something else that had always belonged to it. Not the weight of what was falling. Not even her stepmother's hands moving with the calm efficiency of a woman completing a task she had rehearsed in her mind many times before she permitted herself to perform it. The cold of the metal against the back of her neck, that was the first thing. She did not move. She had understood within the first cut that moving would accomplish nothing and would cost her the only thing available to her in this moment, which was the appearance of composure. So she sat on the stool in the candlelit dressing room, and she kept her eyes open, and she watched in the dark window glass as her hair fell slowly, strand by strand. Then, in larger portions, as Lady Ashton found her rhythm, and the person in the reflection became someone Margaret had never seen before and would have to learn to be. "Be still," Lady Ashton said. Not unkindly, the way a person says be still when they are performing a procedure they have decided is necessary, and your discomfort is simply a variable they have already accounted for. Margaret was still. The last cut came at the nape of her neck. Lady Ashton stepped back. She looked at her work with the particular satisfaction of a woman examining a problem she has just solved. Then she set the shears on the dressing table beside the candle and picked up the bundle of clothing she had prepared and set it in Margaret's lap. "Your name is Thomas," she said. "Thomas Voss. You are 18. You have experience with accounts and correspondence. You will answer to nothing else." Margaret looked down at the bundle. Then she looked up at her own reflection, the close-cropped hair, the unfamiliar angles of her own face without the weight of what had always framed it. The person in the dark glass looked back at her with her own eyes. "And if I refuse?" she said. Lady Ashton picked up the shears and set them in the drawer and closed it with a quiet click. "Then your father's estate passes to my management in full," she said. "And you have nothing. Not a name, not a home, not a single thing he left you." She blew out the candle. She left the room. Margaret sat alone in the dark, with the bundle in her lap and her hair on the floor around the stool and the cold at the back of her neck that the shears had left behind. She sat there for a long time. She did not cry. She was thinking. She was trying to understand how a woman calculates that far in advance that the solution to a duke's interest in her stepdaughter is not refusal, not distance, not a convenient illness, but erasure. Complete and physical and permanent. A new name. A new body, a new life inside the life that was supposed to be hers. She picked up the bundle. She stood. She began to learn how to be Thomas. Before we go any further, if you have ever had someone look directly at you and choose not to see you, this story is for you. Stay until the very end. Because what happens inside Caldwell Estate in the weeks that follow is not simply a story about cruelty. It is a story about what happens when the wrong person underestimates what a man who pays attention is capable of finding. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of those actions reaches back to us. Now, let us go back to Margaret. Because she has just become Thomas, and somewhere across the county, a duke is asking questions about a young woman no one seems able to locate. Margaret Voss had been managing her father's correspondence since she was 16. Not assisting. Managing. Her father, Mr. Edmund Voss, a man of considerable precision and considerably more trust in his daughter than Victorian England typically encouraged, had handed her the letter book on a Tuesday afternoon when she was 16 and told her that his eyesight was failing and his handwriting with it, and that he needed someone he could rely on. She had taken the letter book. She had read every letter in it. She had drafted his responses for the following week and placed them on his desk on Friday morning. He had read them, corrected 2 words, and signed them without further comment. This arrangement had continued for 4 years without incident, and with considerable improvement to the quality of Mr. Voss's professional correspondence, which 3 separate business associates had remarked upon without knowing why. She had her father's mind. The particular kind of mind that moves through numbers the way other people move through rooms naturally, without effort, always knowing where everything is and what it connects to. She had read Blackstone at 17. She had identified an error in the county surveyor's land assessment at 18 and had written to the relevant office under her father's name to have it corrected. The office had corrected it. Her father had said nothing about this, except that she had used the wrong salutation and should use most respectfully rather than yours faithfully when addressing county officials. She had been 21 when he died. A fever. 5 days. The physician said there was nothing to be done after the 3rd day and was honest enough to say so. Lady Ashton had arrived at the Voss household 3 years before this as Edmund's second wife, a widow of careful presentation and considerable patience. She had been warm to Margaret in those 3 years. Warm in the particular way of someone who understands that warmth is an investment and is willing to make it because she can see exactly what it will eventually purchase. Margaret had not been fooled. She had known from the 2nd month that Lady Ashton's warmth was performed. She had said nothing because her father was happy and because she could see no benefit in disturbing a peace that required only her silence to maintain. She had watched, and she had waited, and she had continued managing the correspondence and running the household accounts, and she had told herself that when she was 21 she would be of age, and the question of Lady Ashton would become manageable on her own terms. She had not anticipated dying at 21. She had not anticipated, though she understood it immediately and completely, the moment the solicitor finished reading the particular provision of her father's will that made everything contingent on her good standing and continued residence at the Voss household until the age of 25. 4 years. 4 years during which Lady Ashton controlled the household, the accounts, the access, and the interpretation of what constituted good standing. She had also not anticipated, though she understood this too, immediately, the morning the letter arrived, that the Duke of Caldwell had written to her father 6 months before his death, expressing formal interest in an introduction to Miss Margaret Voss, whose name had reached him through mutual acquaintance, and whose qualities had been described to him in terms he found worth investigating. Lady Ashton had received this letter at the door, as she received all letters. She had read it in the hallway. She had sat with it for 3 weeks. She had made her calculation, and then she had come upstairs to Margaret's room on a Tuesday evening, with a pair of shears and a bundle of boys' clothing, and the particular calm of a woman who has decided that the only safe solution is one that cannot be undone. The Duke would never recognize a name he had never met. He would never look twice at a male clerk. The estate assets would remain under Lady Ashton's management for 4 more years, and Margaret would simply cease to exist in any form that mattered. It was elegant, in the way that truly cold calculations are elegant. Margaret could see that even now. She gave Lady Ashton that. She gave her nothing else. Thomas Voss arrived at Caldwell Estate on a grey November morning with a letter of introduction. A small bag, and the particular careful stillness of someone who has rehearsed every movement and expression they intend to make, and is concentrating very hard on making only those. The estate secretary, a thin, precise man named Mr. Gould, reviewed the letter of introduction and looked at Thomas with the assessing attention of a man who has hired many clerks and knows within the first minute whether he is looking at competence or performance. He looked for somewhat longer than a minute. Then he said that the position involved estate correspondence, account reconciliation, and the maintenance of the tenancy records, that the hours were 6 days a week from 7 until 5, that the accommodation was in the East Servants' Wing, and that he would know by the end of the first week whether Thomas was what the letter claimed. Thomas said, "That seemed entirely reasonable." Mr. Gould blinked. Clerks did not typically find the terms of their employment entirely reasonable. They accepted them. "Right," he said. "Come along then." The first week Margaret spent learning the layout of the estate records with the controlled urgency of someone who understands that competence is the only protection available to them. She was meticulous. She was quiet. She arrived first and left last. She made no errors. By the end of the week, Mr. Gould told her she was satisfactory, which she understood from his tone to be the highest available assessment. The work was not difficult. It was, in fact, the most natural thing she had done in months. The accounts, the correspondence, the tenancy records. She moved through them the way she had always moved through numbers, naturally, without effort, always knowing where everything was and what it connected to. The difficulty was everything else, the binding. The careful management of her own voice pitched lower, used sparingly, the way she had to position herself in rooms so that no one was ever directly behind her, the way she had to sleep lightly because the servants' wing was communal and light sleep was the only available privacy, the way she had to calculate every movement, every expression, every response. The continuous, exhausting arithmetic of being someone. She was not in a house full of people who had no reason to suspect her, and every reason to notice an anomaly. She was very tired. She did not allow this to show. The Duke she saw at a distance for the first 3 weeks. He moved through his own estate with the composed authority of a man entirely at ease inside his own life, not arrogant, simply settled, the way certain people are settled, as though the question of where they belong was resolved long ago, and they have simply been going about their business since. He was taller than she had expected. He had the kind of face that was more interesting than handsome, sharp angles. Grey eyes that move through a room with the particular attention of someone who notices things and does not announce having noticed them. She kept her eyes down when he passed. She kept her movements small. She was Thomas. She was very nearly managing it. The first conversation happened on a Wednesday evening in the 4th week. She was working late in the estate library, reconciling the quarterly tenancy accounts against the payment ledger when the Duke came in. He did not announce himself. He simply came through the door and went to the far shelf and took down a volume and stood reading it by the window in the particular comfortable way of a man in his own library who does not feel the need to explain his presence in it. Margaret kept her eyes on the ledger. She kept her pen moving. She was Thomas. After perhaps 20 minutes, he said, without looking up from his book, The Harwick Tenancy, 3rd entry from the bottom of the October ledger. She found it without looking up. The payment is recorded as received on the 14th, Your Grace, but the date on the corresponding receipt is the 17th. Pause. I noticed that 2 weeks ago, he said. Gould has not mentioned it. Mr. Gould may not have cross-referenced the receipts against the ledger entries. The discrepancy is only visible if you hold both documents simultaneously. Another pause. Longer. And you held both documents simultaneously. It seemed worth doing. He looked at her then. Not the passing attention of an employer registering an employee. The full considered attention of a man who has just heard something that has moved a variable in his thinking. How old are you, Thomas? 18. Your Grace. He looked at her for one moment longer than the question required. Then he returned to his book. Come to me tomorrow morning, he said. I want you to go through the last 3 years of tenancy records. All of them. Tell me what you find. Yes, Your Grace. He left. Margaret set her pen down carefully on the ledger. She looked at her own hand on the page, the particular quality of her handwriting, which her father had always said was too elegant for a man and she had been compensating for every day since November. She was becoming more visible. She knew it. She could not find a way to become less visible without becoming less useful, and being less useful was not available to her as an option, because uselessness meant replacement, and replacement meant leaving, and leaving meant returning to Lady Ashton with nothing. She picked up her pen. She kept working. She told herself it would be manageable. She had not yet accounted for the locket. It was a small thing. Her mother's. An oval of gold, no larger than a shilling, worn on a chain inside her shirt against her skin, invisible as long as she was careful, and she was always careful. Her mother's portrait inside, painted when her mother was 20. The dark hair, the particular set of the jaw that Margaret had inherited, along with the mind and the handwriting, and the quality of attention that made her more visible than she needed to be. She had been bending over the ledger for 3 hours. The chain had worked loose. She did not feel it happen. She felt the absence. She looked down. The locket lay on the open page of the estate ledger, caught in the spine between 2 pages, gold against the pale paper. She reached for it. His hand was there first. She looked up. The Duke was standing beside the desk. He had come in so quietly she had not heard him, or she had been too deep in the accounts to notice, or both. He was looking at the locket in his palm with the expression of a man who has just picked up something he understands is significant and is deciding what to do with that understanding. He opened it. He looked at the portrait inside for a long moment. Then he looked at Margaret. She did not look away. She was past the point where looking away would change anything, and she had her father's instinct about the precise moment when a situation has changed, and pretending otherwise is simply a waste of the time remaining. The grey eyes moved between the portrait and her face, making the comparison that did not need to be made, because it was already made. The dark hair in the portrait now close cropped on the person in front of him, but otherwise the jaw, the eyes, the particular quality of the face that a painting could capture and a pair of shears could not remove. He closed the locket. He held it out. She took it. She held it in her closed fist and waited. He pulled the chair from the opposite side of the desk and sat down. He folded his hands on the desk in front of him. He looked at her with the complete and unhurried attention of a man who has been patient for a long time and has just been given permission to stop being patient. "Miss Voss," he said quietly. Not a question. Something happened in Margaret's chest at the sound of her own name. The name she had not heard in 2 months. She had not known until this moment how much of a person lives in their own name and what it costs to be separated from it. "Yes," she said, her own voice. Not Thomas's voice. Hers. He was quiet for a moment. "I wrote to your father," he said. 14 months ago." "I know," she said. Lady Ashton received the letter. He looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of a man assembling a picture from pieces he has been collecting without knowing what they were assembling toward. The handwriting, the vocabulary, the way she held herself in rooms, the particular quality of attention that had been wrong from the beginning, not wrong in a way he could name, wrong in the way that a thing is wrong, when it doesn't fit the category it's been placed in, and your mind keeps returning to it without being able to say why. "How long have you been here?" he said. 8 weeks. "And before that?" "The shears," she said simply. He looked at her hands on the desk. The particular quality of them, the handwriting hands, the hands that had been managing estate correspondence since 16 and had just spent 8 weeks managing his. Then he looked at her face again, with the complete and unguarded attention of a man who has stopped pretending he is making a professional assessment. "I am going to need you to tell me everything," he said. "Yes," she said. "I thought you might." She told him everything. Not dramatically. In the precise and ordered way she told things, beginning with the letter, proceeding through the calculation, the shears, the bundle of clothing, the name, the provision of her father's will, the 4 years, the assets, the particular coldness of the logic. She told it the way she had been telling it to herself for 8 weeks, clearly, without embellishment, without the expectation that clarity would change what had happened, but with the absolute conviction that it was the only honest, available approach to any situation. He listened to all of it, without interrupting. This was the quality she had noticed first, and trusted most, the listening that did not perform itself. That was simply complete. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Lady Ashton," he said, "is attending the Forsyth dinner on Friday." Margaret looked at him. "She is," she said carefully. "I have also been invited to the Forsyth dinner." "A pause, Your Grace. I have been building the estate tenancy analysis you gave me," he said quietly, "into something considerably broader, with Aldous' assistance. For the past 3 weeks." She looked at him. "You knew." "I suspected," he said. "The locket confirms." A pause. "I have been waiting for the right moment." She was quiet for a long time. Outside the library windows, Caldwell's grounds were dark and still. The fire had burned low. The estate ledger was still open on the desk between them, with the Harwick tenancy entry on the page, and her handwriting her own handwriting, not Thomas's, moving precisely across the columns. "You have been building a case," she said. "Yes. While I was in the servants' wing." "Yes." He paused. "I am sorry it took as long as it did. I should have moved sooner." She looked at him across the desk. This man who had written to her father 14 months ago on the basis of a name and a description, who had noticed the Harwick tenancy discrepancy. and waited to see who else would notice it, who had been holding a locket for 30 seconds before he said her name, and had said it with the complete certainty of someone who had already known before he opened it. "You found me," she said. "You were doing the accounts in my library," he said. It was not a difficult search. The Forsyth dinner was on a Friday in January. 40 guests. Lady Ashton arrived in deep burgundy silk, with the composed certainty of a woman who has managed her position carefully and has no reason to expect the evening to disturb it. She was placed 4 seats from the Duke, which was close enough to observe and far enough to require invitation to approach. Margaret was in the room, not as Thomas. The Duke had sent to the village that morning, and a dress had arrived by afternoon. Simple, dark blue wool, nothing elaborate, but a dress. She had put it on in the room he had given her, not the servants' wing, the blue room in the east corridor, the room that was hers, that had always been meant to be hers, in a house she had been inside for 2 months, without ever entering correctly. She had looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. The short hair, the dress, the particular combination of the two, not quite one thing, not yet fully the other, somewhere in the revision between what she had been and what she was becoming. She had gone downstairs. She had taken her place. Lady Ashton saw her from across the dining room during the second course. The recognition was instant and total. Something happened in her face that she was not able to control, not collapse. She was not constituted for collapse, but a fracture, deep and immediate, and visible for exactly 3 seconds before the composure reasserted itself. 3 seconds was sufficient. The Duke had been watching Lady Ashton since she sat down. He had been watching her with the particular patient attention of a man who knows exactly what he is waiting for and has decided to wait for it correctly. He rose from his chair. He did not call for silence. He did not need to. When the Duke of Caldwell rose from his chair at a county dinner, the room adjusted itself without being asked. He spoke for 8 minutes. He presented the forged letter of introduction. He presented the evidence of the asset management irregularities Aldous had assembled. The withdrawals, the accounts, the pattern of 4 years, carefully constructed to outlast a will provision. He presented the testimony of 3 county solicitors regarding the legal status of Margaret's inheritance. He presented all of it in the precise and unhurried voice of a man who has built something that will hold weight and is delivering it to the people who need to hear it. Then he stopped. He looked down the length of the table to where Margaret sat, short-haired, blue-dressed, entirely herself, and he said simply, "Miss Margaret Voss, I believe this introduction is considerably overdue." The room was very quiet. Lady Ashton sat with her spine straight, and her hands folded, and her expression holding by the particular effort of a woman whose composure has always been her primary weapon, and is discovering that a weapon requires something to stand. The something was gone. Lady Ashton left the county within the month. The legal proceedings regarding the estate assets continued for the better part of a year, and concluded in a manner that satisfied Aldous considerably, and that Margaret followed with the quiet, systematic attention of a woman watching. Something she set in motion arrive at its correct destination. Mr. Gould retired in the spring. He shook Margaret's hand at his farewell, and said that Thomas had been the best clerk he had hired in 20 years, and that Miss Voss was evidently the same person, and that he found this entirely unsurprising in retrospect. Margaret thanked him. She meant it. Her hair grew back slowly. This was not a metaphor. It was simply hair, and it grew at the pace. Hair grows, and she watched it in the mirror each morning, with the patient and practical attention she gave to all processes that could not be hurried. By April it had reached her shoulders. By summer it was long enough to pin. She did not rush it. She had learned in the servants' wing, and in the library, and in the 8 weeks of being Thomas, that the most important things could not be hurried, only built, carefully, with the right materials, by someone who was paying sufficient attention. The Duke came to see her in the library on a Tuesday morning in March. She was reviewing the estate correspondence, her own correspondence now, under her own name, with her own handwriting moving precisely across the page. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her, the way he had stood at the library window, looking at the Harwick tenancy entry, with the full weight of someone who has found what they were looking for and is not going to pretend. "They haven't," he said. "I have a question." She set down her pen. "Ask it. The letter I wrote your father," he said, 14 months ago. "If it had reached you, if Lady Ashton had not intercepted it, what would you have said?" She looked at him across the library. The grey eyes, the sharp face, the particular quality of attention she had been working beside for 4 months, and that she had trusted since the first evening. He had noticed the Harwick discrepancy and chosen to wait rather than act. "I would have said," she said carefully, "that I would need to know considerably more before I could give a considered answer." "And now?" he said. 4 months later, considerably more known. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the library windows, Caldwell's grounds were pale and cold in the March light. The bare trees, the long grass, the particular quality of early spring that is not yet warm, but is no longer winter. "Now," she said, "I have a considered answer." He waited. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. With the expression she had learned over 4 months, was his version of complete and unguarded happiness. The particular stillness of a man who has found the answer he was looking for and has no intention of making a performance of having found it. He came into the library. He sat in the chair across from her desk. He picked up the pen she had set down and held it out. "Then finish your correspondence," he said. "We can discuss the rest this evening." She took the pen. She looked at him for a moment, this man who had stopped his carriage on a road in November for reasons he could not have named and had been paying attention ever since. "You are not going to make this dramatic," she said. "No," he said simply. "Good," she said, and she went back to the correspondence. They were married in May, in the Caldwell chapel, small, deliberate, theirs. Margaret wore her hair, pinned simply with 2 ivory combs that had belonged to her mother. The dress was the same dark blue wool from the Forsyth dinner, because she had decided it was the dress that had been present at the beginning of the correct version of things, and she wanted it present at the official beginning as, well. The Duke held both her hands during the vows, not one, both. The hands that had been managing his correspondence for 4 months under a false name and that would manage it for the rest of their lives under the correct one. Mr. Aldous attended and sat in the front row, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has done his work correctly. He wept briefly during the vows, and was entirely unembarrassed about it. Mr. Gould sent a letter from his retirement cottage, congratulating them both, and noting that the estate accounts had been in better order since Thomas arrived than in the preceding 5 years, and that he trusted this standard would be maintained. Margaret wrote back confirming that it would. Lady Ashton lived out her remaining years in a rented house in Bath. Margaret arranged a modest allowance through her solicitors, not from warmth, from the particular clarity of a woman who has decided that the weight of hatred costs the person carrying it more than the person it is directed at, and that she has other things to do with what she has. Lady Ashton accepted the allowance without acknowledgement. This was the arrangement, and it was sufficient. The locket was placed in the top drawer of Margaret's writing desk at Caldwell. She opened it, sometimes, not often, but sometimes, and looked at her mother's portrait, and thought about the Tuesday evening, and the shears, and the cold at the back of her neck, and the stool, and the dark window, and the person in the reflection becoming unrecognizable. She looked at it, and she thought the person in that reflection was not lost. She had simply been somewhere else for a while, doing the accounts, waiting for the right moment, being found by a man who had been looking since before she arrived. Some things take the route they take. They arrive, anyway. Thank you for staying to the very end. If Margaret's story moved something in you, if the image of a woman sitting perfectly still while the shears worked and watching herself disappear stayed with you, then do one thing right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Not a casual forward, a deliberate share, to someone who needs to be reminded that the right people are always paying attention. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of you matters to this library. Until next time, the doors are always open.